What happened next would replay in my nightmares for months to come. The sound of gunshots, Serafina's scream of rage and pain, the crash of furniture as bodies hit the floor. When the chaos finally stopped, my daughter was lying on the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from Augustus's parents, her blood seeping into the antique fibers. She was still alive, but barely. As the paramedics worked to stabilize her, she looked up at me with eyes full of hatred and spoke the last words she would ever say to her mother. I should have used more poison. The confession was recorded, witnessed by federal agents, and legally admissible in court. My daughter had finally told me the truth about what she'd done, and it was exactly what I'd feared to hear. Serafina Thornfield, the daughter I'd raised to be strong and independent, was a cold-blooded killer who had tried to murder her own mother for money. The nightmare was over, but the damage to our family would last forever. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance as they rushed Serafina to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, the same hospital where I had nearly died from her poisoning attempt 6 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my blood-stained living room giving my statement to Detective Sarah Martinez of the Santa Barbara Police Department. Mrs. Thornfield, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened when your daughter made her final attack, Detective Martinez said, her pen poised over a notepad that already contained pages of my testimony. She grabbed a vial from her briefcase. Elena's team later confirmed it contained concentrated digitalis, enough to kill me within minutes if she'd succeeded in forcing me to ingest it. When I told her to step away from the briefcase, she dropped all pretense of being a loving daughter. She called me a stupid old woman and said I should have died 6 months ago. And that's when your son, Maximilian, drew his weapon? Yes. Max pointed his gun at Sarah and told her to stop. I think he was trying to protect me, but the federal agents were already moving in. When Sarah lunged at me with the poison, Agent Morrison fired a non-lethal shot that brought her down. Detective Martinez nodded, consulting her notes. The entire incident was recorded by multiple surveillance devices, so we have clear evidence of attempted murder and her confession. Combined with the evidence your husband gathered about the original poisoning, we have more than enough for a conviction. I looked around the living room where I'd raised 3 children, now marked by police tape and forensic equipment. The Persian rug where Sarah had fallen was being processed as evidence, along with the vial of poison and her briefcase full of what turned out to be detailed plans for eliminating me permanently. What happens now? Serafina will face charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, conspiracy, and possession of controlled substances with intent to cause bodily harm. Given the premeditated nature of both attacks and her confession, she's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. Life in prison. My daughter, the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the garden, who I'd helped with homework and college applications, who I'd walked down the aisle at her wedding, would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Elena approached with a stack of documents. Mrs. Thornfield, we found something else in Serafina's briefcase that you need to see. She handed me a manila folder labeled Thornfield Estate Accelerated Distribution Plan. Inside were detailed financial projections showing how Sarah had planned to divide my inheritance among herself and her brothers after my death, along with forged documents that would have made her the executor of my estate. She had it all figured out, Elena explained. Your death would have looked like natural causes, an elderly woman who suffered a fatal heart attack while still recovering from food poisoning. She calculated that with her legal expertise, she could expedite the inheritance distribution and have access to the money within 6 months. But there was more. The folder contained correspondence with overseas banks, shell company registrations, and evidence that Sarah had been planning to move most of the inheritance offshore where it couldn't be traced or recovered. She wasn't just planning to kill you, Elena continued. She was planning to steal the entire inheritance from her brothers as well.
they would have received token amounts while she disappeared with the bulk of the $48 million. Detective Martinez looked up from her notes. Mrs. Thornfield, do you want to press charges for the theft conspiracy as well? Press every charge possible. My daughter made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. As the police and federal agents finished processing the crime scene, I found myself alone with Maximilian in the kitchen. He was sitting at the breakfast table with his head in his hands, his concealed carry pistol now evidence in the custody of the FBI. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said without looking up. "I suspected something was wrong with Sarah, but I never imagined she was capable of murder. When I bought that gun yesterday, I thought maybe she was planning to hurt you financially or legally. I never thought she'd actually try to poison you again." "Why didn't you tell me about your suspicions?"
"Because I hoped I was wrong. Because she's my sister, and I didn't want to believe that someone in our family could be that evil." He finally looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "When she attacked you tonight, when I saw that vial in her hand, I would have killed her to protect you. My own sister, and I was ready to kill her." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Max, you did the right thing. You protected your mother from someone who was trying to murder her. The fact that person happened to be your sister doesn't change that. But it changes everything else, doesn't it? Our family is destroyed. Cass is in protective custody, Sarah will spend her life in prison, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering how I didn't see the monster she'd become." Over the next several days, the full scope of Serafina's planning became clear through the FBI's investigation. She had been researching my murder for over a year, exploring different methods and timing options. The poisoning attempt at my birthday dinner had been carefully calculated. If I'd died that night, it would have looked like a tragic accident during a family celebration. When that attempt failed and I survived, she'd begun planning more direct methods. The vial of digitalis she'd brought to our final dinner was concentrated enough to cause immediate cardiac arrest. If Elena's team hadn't intervened, I would have been dead within minutes. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a series of encrypted files on Sarah's computer that detailed contingency plans for eliminating other family members if they became obstacles to her inheritance goals. She had researched Maximilian's business vulnerabilities and Cassius's criminal associates, looking for ways to arrange accidents if necessary. My daughter hadn't just planned to kill me, she had been prepared to murder her entire family for money. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received word that Serafina had been deemed competent to stand trial and was being held without bail. Her attorney, one of the most expensive criminal defense lawyers in California, had advised her to accept a plea bargain, but Sarah was refusing to admit guilt. "She wants to take this to trial," Elena informed me during one of our final meetings. "Her lawyers think they can argue that she was mentally incompetent due to financial stress and emotional trauma from her divorce." Will that work? Not with the evidence we have. The planning was too extensive, too methodical. This wasn't a crime of passion or mental breakdown. It was calculated murder for financial gain. Elena was right. When the trial began 6 months later, the prosecution presented an overwhelming case. The jury saw the surveillance footage of Sarah's attempted break-in at my house, heard recordings of her confession, and examined the detailed murder plans found in her possession. The defense tried to paint her as a loving daughter, driven to desperation by financial ruin, but the evidence told a different story. When the prosecution played the recording of her final words, "I should have used more poison," the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges. Serafina Thornfield was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no emotion when the verdict was read, and she refused to look at me throughout the entire trial. The last words she ever spoke to me remained that cruel confession in my living room. The inheritance that had started this nightmare was finally mine to claim. Harrison Blackwell guided me through the legal processes, and within 8 months of Augustus's death, I had access to the full $48 million estate. But the money felt tainted now, earned through the destruction of my family and the discovery that one of my children was a killer. I kept enough to maintain the Montecito estate and ensure my financial security for the rest of my life. The remainder went to various charities, with a significant portion establishing the Augustus Thornfield Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention. If my story could help protect other families from similar betrayals, then at least some good would come from our tragedy. Maximilian used his portion of the inheritance to pay off his debts and restart his technology company on more solid footing. He moved back to Santa Barbara to be closer to me, and we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. The experience had changed him, made him more thoughtful, more aware of the importance of family bonds that went beyond financial considerations. I keep thinking about the signs I missed. The way Sarah became more calculating after her divorce, how she always steered conversations toward money and inheritance, how she seemed to view every relationship as a transaction. We all missed the signs because we loved her and wanted to believe the best about her. Cassius was released from protective custody after testifying against his sister. The experience had been traumatic for him, learning that the person he trusted with deadly chemicals had used them to try to murder their mother. He closed his gallery and entered a rehabilitation program to deal with his gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. "I gave her the poison," he said during one of his visits to the estate. "I handed my sister the weapon she used to try to kill you. How do I live with that?" "You live with it by making better choices going forward. You couldn't have known what she was planning. The guilt belongs to her, not to you."
Armed with medical evidence, Dr. Hartwell investigated Evangeline's background systematically. She wrote to medical colleagues in Boston requesting information about similar cases. What she discovered was terrifying. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, whom Evangeline claimed as her nutritional consultant, didn't exist. The health supplements weren't legitimate medical preparations. Responses from Boston-area physicians revealed similar cases. Dr. Franklin Nash from Massachusetts General wrote about deaths among married men between 1918 and 1920 showing similar patterns. "We treated 4 cases of apparent gastroenteritis leading to cardiac failure," Dr. Nash wrote. All 4 men were recently married to women who had moved to Boston from other locations. The wives were devoted caregivers with unusual medical knowledge who seemed scientifically interested in their husband's illness progression. Similar reports came from Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine. A pattern of a killer who had been operating across multiple states for years, perfecting her method. Theodore Ashworth and Nathaniel Cromwell weren't Evangeline's second and third victims, Dr. Hartwell realized. They were likely her 6th and 7th. She had been perfecting her method for years. By January 1923, Augustus's arsenic levels were approaching dangerous concentrations. Based on previous victims' timing, Evangeline would soon administer a final, fatal dose. Dr. Hartwell approached Sheriff Daniel Morrison with her evidence. Sheriff Morrison was a practical man who had served as military police during the Great War with experience in complex investigations. "What you're suggesting is extraordinary," Sheriff Morrison said after reviewing the documentation, "but the medical evidence is compelling. If Augustus Blackwood is being systematically poisoned, we have to act." They began systematic surveillance of Evangeline's activities, discovering that she maintained careful schedules for administering health supplements, always timing doses with meals she prepared personally. They also observed that Evangeline was already researching potential future victims, making inquiries about successful, unmarried men in surrounding towns. She was already planning Augustus's replacement while slowly murdering her current husband, Dr. Hartwell realized. On February 14, 1923, Valentine's Day, Dr. Hartwell received an urgent message. Augustus Blackwood had collapsed at the bank with severe abdominal pain, difficulty breathing, and cardiac irregularities, symptoms indicating acute arsenic poisoning at potentially fatal levels. "This was the moment I had been preparing for," Dr. Hartwell wrote. Evangeline had decided Augustus had served his purpose. She was ready to collect her third Thornfield insurance payout, probably her 8th or 9th overall. As Dr. Hartwell raced toward the Blackwood home, she carried medical supplies and evidence of one of the most systematic killing sprees in New England history. She also carried emergency treatments for arsenic poisoning, treatments Augustus would need to survive long enough for justice. But Dr. Hartwell had discovered something more disturbing. The woman calling herself Evangeline Blackthorne had operated under multiple identities across New England. In Boston, she had been Victoria Ashford. In Connecticut, Isabella Cromwell. In New Hampshire, Cordelia Whitmore. Each identity was carefully crafted to appeal to specific communities, including tragic elements that generated sympathy and discouraged background investigations. We were dealing with a predator who had perfected the art of assuming false identities, Dr. Hartwell wrote. As she approached the elegant Victorian home, Dr. Hartwell could see Sheriff Morrison and his deputies positioning themselves around the property. If Augustus was suffering from acute arsenic poisoning, they would have probable cause to arrest Evangeline. The front door opened before Dr. Hartwell could knock. Evangeline Blackthorne stood in the doorway, dressed in black silk like an elegant angel of death. Her violet eyes were bright with what appeared to be concern, but Dr. Hartwell now recognized as excitement, the excitement of a predator watching prey approach death. "Dr. Hartwell, good, thank you you're here," Evangeline said, her voice perfectly conveying worry and gratitude. "Augustus is so terribly ill. I'm afraid I might lose another husband." But Evangeline Blackthorne had not anticipated that someone would finally recognize her pattern and understand her methods. As Dr. Hartwell entered the house where Augustus Blackwood lay dying, possibly from the same poison that had killed Theodore Ashworth and Nathaniel Cromwell, she carried evidence that could expose one of the most systematic and sophisticated killing sprees in American history. The question was, would she arrive in time to save Augustus, or would she become the next victim of a woman who had turned marriage into murder and made death her most intimate companion? When Dr. Rosalind Hartwell discovered that Augustus Blackwood was being slowly poisoned with arsenic by his wife Evangeline, she thought she had uncovered a triple murder case. But as she raced to save Augustus's life on that Valentine's Day in 1923, she had no idea she was about to confront one of the most prolific female serial killers in American history. What happened in that elegant Victorian house would reveal the true scope of Evangeline's killing spree, expose her real identity, and prove that some monsters are far more dangerous when they wear the face of a grieving widow. When Dr. Rosalind Hartwell discovered that Augustus Blackwood was being slowly poisoned with arsenic by his wife Evangeline, she thought she had uncovered a triple murder case. But as she raced to save Augustus's life on that Valentine's Day in 1923, she had no idea she was about to confront one of the most prolific female serial killers in American history. What happened in that elegant Victorian house would reveal the true scope of Evangeline's killing spree, expose her real identity, and prove that some monsters are far more dangerous when they wear the face of a grieving widow.
Dr. Hartwell followed Evangeline through the meticulously decorated foyer of the Blackwood mansion, her medical bag heavy in her hand, her mind racing with the knowledge that she was walking deeper into a trap that had already claimed at least 7 lives. The house reeked of sickness and something else, a sweet metallic odor that Dr. Hartwell's medical training told her was the smell of a body beginning to shut down from systemic poisoning. Augustus Blackwood lay in the master bedroom, his skin gray and waxy, his breathing shallow and irregular. "He's been like this since dawn," Evangeline said, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine concern. "The poor dear was complaining of stomach pains all night, and then this morning he collapsed while getting dressed for the bank." Dr. Hartwell knelt beside Augustus, checking his pulse and examining his eyes. The symptoms were unmistakable: acute arsenic poisoning in its final stages. His pupils were constricted, his heartbeat erratic, and his skin had the characteristic grayish pallor of heavy metal toxicity. "Augustus," Dr. Hartwell said softly, "can you hear me? This is Dr. Hartwell." Augustus's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty on her face. "Doctor, feel terrible, can't think straight." His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "When did you last eat?" Dr. Hartwell asked, knowing that Evangeline was watching her every move. "Last night, Evangeline made special dinner, Valentine's celebration. Felt sick right after." Dr. Hartwell glanced at Evangeline, who was standing in the doorway with her hands clasped in front of her, like a portrait of wifely devotion. But there was something in her violet eyes that made Dr. Hartwell's blood run cold. Not fear or grief, but anticipation, as if she was watching a particularly fascinating scientific experiment reach its conclusion. "I need to examine him privately," Dr. Hartwell said firmly. "Please wait downstairs while I conduct my assessment." "Of course," Evangeline replied smoothly. "I'll prepare some tea. You must be exhausted from rushing over here in this weather." As soon as Evangeline's footsteps faded down the stairs, Dr. Hartwell opened her medical bag and withdrew a small vial of activated charcoal suspension and a dose of British anti-lewisite, one of the few antidotes for arsenic poisoning that had been developed during the Great War. "Augustus, listen to me very carefully," she whispered urgently. "Your wife has been poisoning you with arsenic. I'm going to give you medication that might save your life, but you need to trust me and do exactly what I say." Augustus's eyes widened with shock and disbelief. "Evangeline, no, she loves me. She's been taking such good care of me." "That's how she does it. She plays the perfect wife while slowly killing you. She's done this before, Augustus. Theodore Ashworth, Nathaniel Cromwell, they all died the same way." While Augustus struggled to process this revelation, Dr. Hartwell quickly administered the antidote and then slipped downstairs to find evidence that could be used in court. She could hear Evangeline moving around in the kitchen, preparing the promised tea. Dr. Hartwell found Evangeline standing at the stove, stirring a pot of what appeared to be beef broth. On the counter nearby were several small glass containers with handwritten labels, herbs and supplements that Evangeline claimed were for Augustus's health. "How is he, doctor?" Evangeline asked without turning around. "I'm so worried. He's never been this ill before." "I'm concerned about his symptoms," Dr. Hartwell replied carefully, moving closer to examine the containers on the counter. "They're quite severe. What exactly has he been eating and drinking over the past few days?" "Just his normal meals plus the health tonics I've been preparing," she said, gesturing toward the containers. "I've been following the recommendations from Dr. Whitfield in Boston, special nutrition for men in stressful occupations." Dr. Hartwell picked up one of the containers and unscrewed the lid. Inside was a white powder that looked like flour or sugar. But the smell was wrong, too sweet with an underlying bitter edge that her medical training told her was the smell of a body beginning to shut down from systemic poisoning. "This is an interesting mixture," Dr. Hartwell said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "What exactly is in it?" "Oh, various herbs and minerals, iron supplements, calcium powder, some digestive aids. Dr. Whitfield provides detailed instructions for preparation." "I'd love to speak with Dr. Whitfield about Augustus's case," Dr. Hartwell said. "Could you provide me with his contact information?" For just a moment, Evangeline's stirring faltered, and Dr. Hartwell saw something flicker across her face. Not confusion or helpfulness, but calculation, as if she was rapidly working through the implications of the request. "I'm afraid Dr. Whitfield is traveling in Europe currently. He's studying advanced nutritional therapy techniques at universities in Germany. But I have all his instructions written down." Dr. Hartwell nodded and slipped the container into her coat pocket when Evangeline turned back to the stove. This would be the physical evidence Sheriff Morrison needed to make an arrest. "Dr. Hartwell?"
Evangeline said suddenly, her voice taking on a different quality, less concerned, more curious. You know don't.
Dr. Hartwell realized that pretense was no longer possible. Yes, I know what you are. Evangeline smiled, the first genuinely honest expression Dr. Hartwell had ever seen on her face. It was not a pleasant sight. Good. I was wondering when someone would finally figure it out. You're more observant than the doctors in the other towns. Other towns? Dr. Hartwell asked, though she already suspected the answer. Boston, Hartford, Portsmouth, Portland. Evangeline began counting on her fingers. Oh, and that little farming community in New Hampshire, where I was Cordelia Whitmore for a few months. You can't imagine how tedious it becomes playing the same role over and over again. How many men have you killed? Dr. Hartwell asked directly. Does it matter? They're all dead, and I'm wealthy enough to live however I choose. Though I must admit, I've grown fond of Vermont. The isolation makes everything so much easier. Evangeline moved away from the stove, and Dr. Hartwell noticed that she had picked up a long, sharp carving knife from the counter, the same type of knife that would be perfectly normal to find in any kitchen, but deadly in the hands of a woman who had perfected murder. You want to understand me, don't you, Dr. Hartwell? Evangeline said, testing the blade's sharpness against her thumb. I can see it in your eyes, that scientific curiosity that compels you to ask questions even when you're in danger. You're not like other people, Dr. Hartwell said, trying to keep Evangeline talking while mentally calculating distances to exits and weapons. You don't feel empathy or remorse. Empathy is a weakness, Evangeline replied matter-of-factly. It prevents people from taking necessary actions, from pursuing their goals efficiently. I learned that lesson very early in life. What happened to make you this way? Evangeline laughed, a sound that was genuinely amused, but completely devoid of warmth. Nothing happened to make me this way, doctor. This is simply what I am. I was born without the emotional constraints that limit other people's potential. She began moving around the kitchen, staying between Dr. Hartwell and the door, the knife held casually but ready to be used at a moment's notice. When I was 12 years old, I realized that I could make people do whatever I wanted by understanding what they needed to hear. Other children cried when they were punished. I studied the adults to learn what responses would minimize future punishment and maximize future opportunities. When I was 16, I discovered that men were even easier to manipulate than women. They want to feel important, needed, protective. Give them a beautiful woman who makes them feel like heroes, and they'll sign over everything they own. And killing them, Dr. Hartwell asked, is simply the most efficient way to claim the assets permanently. Divorce involves lawyers, judges, division of property. Death involves grief, sympathy, and uncontested inheritance. Evangeline's clinical description of murder as a business decision was more chilling than any display of rage or passion would have been. Dr. Hartwell realized she was dealing with someone who was genuinely incapable of viewing other human beings as anything more than resources to be exploited. You want to understand me, don't you, Dr. Hartwell? Evangeline said, seeming to enjoy having an audience who could appreciate the sophistication of her methods. It's actually quite simple once you understand the principles involved. First, research. I spend weeks studying my target before making contact, their business, their family, their habits, their psychological weaknesses. Knowledge is power, and power is safety. Second, presentation. I become exactly what they need me to be. For Theodore, I was the refined widow who understood his loneliness. For Nathaniel, I was the business partner who could help him expand his store.
For Augustus, I was the sophisticated companion who could match his intellectual interests. Integration. I make myself indispensable to their daily lives, their emotional well-being, their future plans. They can't imagine living without me because I've systematically eliminated their other sources of support and validation. Fourth, documentation. Marriage certificates, insurance policies, wills, bank accounts. Everything must be legally arranged before I proceed to the final stage. And finally, elimination. Slow poisoning with arsenic, administered in doses small enough to avoid suspicion, but large enough to gradually destroy their organ systems. The death appears natural, the grieving widow receives sympathy instead of suspicion, and the insurance companies pay out without question. Dr. Hartwell felt sick listening to Evangeline describe murder with the detached precision of a technical manual. But why arsenic specifically? It's perfect for this application, readily available as rat poison, virtually undetectable with specific testing, symptoms that mimic common illnesses. Most importantly, it allows me to control the timing precisely. I can keep a man sick but functional for months, then deliver a fatal dose whenever it's most convenient. Theodore started getting suspicious about his symptoms, so I accelerated his timeline. Nathaniel was beginning to trust his assistant more than me, so he had to die before he changed his will. Augustus was talking about hiring an assistant for the bank, which would have reduced my access to his finances.
How long have you been doing this? Dr. Hartwell asked. Since 1916. My first husband was actually legitimate, Richard Ashford, a Boston merchant who died in a genuine accident. But when I saw how easily I could claim his assets and how much sympathy I received as a young widow, I realized I had discovered my true calling. The second was deliberate. Charles Morrison, a shipping executive. I used digitalis from foxglove plants, crude compared to my current methods, but effective. The third was James Whitmore in Connecticut, then Peter Cromwell in New Hampshire. Dr. Hartwell noticed that Evangeline was using surnames from her victims as her own assumed names, a trophy system that allowed her to carry pieces of her murders with her as she moved from town to town. Each murder taught me something new about method, timing, and presentation. By the time I reached Vermont, I had perfected the process. Theodore, Nathaniel, and Augustus were my masterpieces. Clean, efficient, completely undetectable. Until now, Dr. Hartwell said. Yes, until now. Evangeline's grip tightened on the knife handle. You've been very clever, Dr. Hartwell. The monthly blood tests, the correspondence with other physicians, the systematic documentation. I underestimated you. It won't matter. Augustus will die today as planned. You'll die in a tragic accident while trying to save him, perhaps a slip on the icy steps, a fatal blow to the head. And I'll be free to move to the next town, assume a new identity, and continue my work. But I'm curious about something. Evangeline tilted her head like a predator studying prey. What made you suspicious? What pattern did you see that the other doctors missed? Dr. Hartwell realized that Evangeline's question wasn't idle curiosity. She was conducting an exit interview to learn how to avoid detection in the future. Every answer would help her become more dangerous. You made mistakes, Dr. Hartwell said, deciding that misdirection might be her best strategy. Your story about Dr. Whitfield was inconsistent. Your knowledge of medical procedures was too advanced for a seamstress. Your grief performances were too perfect. Real grief is messier, more unpredictable. Interesting. I'll remember that for next time. Evangeline moved closer, the knife held in a way that suggested she had experience using it as a weapon. Any other observations you'd like to share before we conclude our conversation? Yes. You're not as smart as you think you are. Evangeline's eyebrows rose in amusement. Bold words from someone who's about to die. Please elaborate.
You assumed that because you fooled people in the past, you could fool everyone indefinitely. But you never considered that someone might be specifically watching for your pattern. You never planned for the possibility of systematic medical surveillance. More importantly, you never considered that your victims might survive long enough to testify against you. Augustus is dying upstairs, Evangeline said confidently. Actually, Augustus is recovering upstairs. I administered British anti-Lewisite 20 minutes ago, one of the few effective antidotes for arsenic poisoning. He'll be sick for several days, but he'll live long enough to see you hang. For the first time since Dr. Hartwell had known her, Evangeline looked genuinely surprised. The mask of perfect control slipped, revealing something raw and dangerous underneath. That's impossible. The arsenic levels should have been fatal by now. They would have been if I hadn't been monitoring his blood chemistry for months. I knew exactly when you planned to deliver the final dose, and I was prepared to counteract it. Evangeline's face hardened with rage, the first genuine emotion Dr. Hartwell had ever seen her display. You interfered with my work. I saved a man's life. You ruined years of planning. Do you have any idea how much effort goes into creating the perfect murder? The outburst revealed something crucial about Evangeline's psychology. She took professional pride in her killing, viewing each murder as an artistic achievement. Having her masterpiece disrupted was more infuriating to her than the prospect of being caught. The sound of breaking glass from upstairs interrupted their conversation. Evangeline's head snapped toward the ceiling, her predator instincts alert to any change in the situation. Sheriff Morrison and his deputies are coming through the upstairs windows, Dr. Hartwell explained calmly. We've been planning this for weeks. They've been positioned around the house since I arrived. You set me up, Evangeline said, her voice low and dangerous. I documented your crimes, gathered evidence, and arranged for law enforcement to witness your confession. Everything you've said in this kitchen has been heard by Deputy Charles Watson, who's been listening at the back door. As if summoned by her words, the back door opened and Deputy Watson stepped inside, his service revolver drawn and pointed at Evangeline. Mrs. Blackthorne, please put down the knife and step away from Dr. Hartwell, he said firmly. Evangeline looked from the deputy to Dr. Hartwell, calculating her options with the same cold intelligence she had applied to planning murders. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs indicated that more law enforcement officers were securing Augustus and searching the house. This is very inconvenient, Evangeline said, as if discussing a minor scheduling conflict rather than her arrest for multiple murders. Put the knife down, Deputy Watson repeated. Instead, she tightened her grip on the weapon and took a step toward Dr. Hartwell. I don't think so. Dr. Hartwell and I are going to walk out of here together, and you're going to let us go. That's not going to happen. Sheriff Morrison's voice came from the kitchen doorway as he entered with his own weapon drawn. You are surrounded, Mrs. Blackthorne. There is no escape.
My name isn't Mrs. Blackthorne, Evangeline said with a bitter smile. It's never been Mrs. Blackthorne or Mrs. Ashford or any of the other names I've used. You people never bothered to learn who I really am. Then tell us, Dr. Hartwell said, who are you really? My real name is Victoria Slade. I was born in Chicago in 1888 to parents who died when I was 14, leaving me with no family, no money, and no prospects except what I could create for myself. I learned very quickly that society has no place for women who refuse to be victims. If you're not pretty enough to marry well, not rich enough to live independently, and not willing to work in a factory for starvation wages, then you have to make your own opportunities. I made my opportunities by understanding that men are fundamentally weak creatures who can be manipulated through their emotions and their egos. I became expert at giving them what they thought they wanted while taking everything they actually had. Sheriff Morrison had been listening to this confession while slowly moving closer, but Victoria, no longer pretending to be Evangeline, noticed his approach and pressed the knife against Dr. Hartwell's throat. I said, stay back. I have nothing to lose now, Sheriff. If I'm going to hang anyway, I might as well take Dr. Hartwell with me." "You don't want to do that," Dr. Hartwell said quietly. "Murder has always been business for you, not passion. Killing me won't gain you anything. It will satisfy my curiosity about what it feels like to watch someone die quickly instead of slowly." The complete absence of human feeling in Victoria's voice sent chills through everyone in the room. Dr. Hartwell realized that she was dealing with someone who viewed murder not just as a means to an end, but as an intellectual exercise. "Before you kill me," Dr. Hartwell said, playing for time, while Sheriff Morrison and Deputy Watson positioned themselves for a clear shot, "I have a question about your methods. Ask quickly. How did you get the arsenic into Augustus's food without him tasting it? Arsenic has a distinctive flavor that most people notice." Victoria's grip on the knife loosened slightly as her professional pride overcame her caution. "I've been building his tolerance gradually for months. Small doses mixed with strong flavors. Coffee, wine, spiced foods. By the time I was ready to deliver the fatal dose, his taste buds were too damaged to detect it." "And the other victims?" "Each case was different. Theodore's back pain gave me an excuse to prepare special herbal teas, easy to mask the taste. Nathaniel's digestive problems made him grateful for any food that didn't cause immediate discomfort. The key is understanding each victim's vulnerabilities and exploiting them systematically." Dr. Hartwell noticed that Sheriff Morrison was now directly behind Victoria, close enough to act, but waiting for the right moment. "One more question. Why did you stay in Vermont so long? Your usual pattern was to move on after each murder." "Vermont was perfect, isolated, trusting, wealthy enough to make the effort worthwhile. I was planning to establish a permanent base here, cycling through victims in surrounding towns. I could have operated here for decades without detection if you hadn't interfered." "That was your mistake," Dr. Hartwell said. "You got comfortable. You started thinking of it as your territory instead of staying mobile." Victoria's eyes flashed with rage at the suggestion that she had made a tactical error. In that moment of distraction, Sheriff Morrison struck, grabbing her wrist and forcing the knife away from Dr. Hartwell's throat. The struggle was brief but violent. Victoria fought with surprising strength and viciousness, clawing and biting like a wild animal. But she was outnumbered and outmatched by officers who had experience subduing dangerous criminals. When the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, Victoria Slade's composure returned as suddenly as it had vanished. She straightened her dress, smoothed her hair, and looked around the room with the detached interest of someone observing a mildly amusing social event. "Well, gentlemen, you've had an exciting afternoon. I trust you'll give me credit for providing more entertainment than your usual arrests for public drunkenness and cattle theft." "Victoria Slade," Sheriff Morrison said formally, "you're under arrest for the murders of Theodore Ashworth, Nathaniel Cromwell, and the attempted murder of Augustus Blackwood. You'll also be charged with fraud, impersonation, and conspiracy." "Don't forget the murders in other states," Dr. Hartwell added. "We have correspondence with law enforcement in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine. They'll want to question you about cases dating back to 1916. Victoria shrugged, as if discussing someone else's crimes. "I suppose I should be flattered that my work has attracted so much professional attention. Not many women achieve that level of notoriety." As they led her toward the door, Victoria turned back to Dr. Hartwell one final time. You realize this won't end with my arrest, don't you, Doctor? There are others like me out there, women who've learned the same lessons I learned, who've discovered the same opportunities I discovered. Arresting me won't protect society from what we represent." "Maybe not," Dr. Hartwell replied, "but it will protect Augustus Blackwood and the men in whatever town you were planning to visit next." Victoria smiled, the same cold, predatory expression that had been her only genuine emotional response throughout the entire encounter. "We'll see."
As Victoria Slade was loaded into the sheriff's wagon for transport to the county jail, Dr. Hartwell hurried back upstairs to check on Augustus Blackwood. She found him sitting up in bed, color returning to his face as the antidote continued to counteract the arsenic in his system. "Is it true, what you told me?" Augustus asked weakly. "About Evangeline, about the poison?" "I'm afraid so. We found arsenic compounds in the supplements she was giving you, and she confessed to murdering Theodore Ashworth and Nathaniel Cromwell using the same method." Augustus closed his eyes, processing the revelation that the woman he had loved and trusted was actually a calculating killer who had been slowly murdering him for months. "How long do I have to live?" he asked. "You're going to recover completely. The antidote I gave you will neutralize the remaining arsenic in your system. You'll feel weak for a few days, but there should be no permanent damage." "And my son, Marcus?" "Marcus is fine. Victoria never saw him as a threat because he works for you rather than competing with you for assets. Her targets were always the primary breadwinners who could provide the largest insurance payouts." Dr. Hartwell spent another hour monitoring Augustus's vital signs and explaining the treatment protocol that would help his body eliminate the remaining toxins. She also provided him with documentation of Victoria's crimes, knowing that he would need to understand the full scope of what had been done to him. While Dr. Hartwell cared for Augustus, Sheriff Morrison and his deputies conducted a thorough search of the Blackwood house and Victoria's cottage. What they found provided overwhelming evidence of her criminal activities. In Victoria's sewing room, hidden behind bolts of fabric, they discovered a collection of documents that revealed the full extent of her operations. Marriage certificates under different names, insurance policies for deceased husbands, correspondence with lawyers about estate settlements, and detailed financial records showing how she had invested the proceeds from each murder. Most disturbing were the journals Victoria had kept, clinical notes documenting each victim's response to different doses of arsenic, observations about their psychological reactions to being slowly poisoned, and plans for future victims in other Vermont towns. She kept records like a medical researcher. Deputy Watson told Dr. Hartwell, "Every symptom, every behavioral change, every stage of the poisoning process. It's like she was conducting scientific experiments on human subjects." In her mind, that's exactly what she was doing. She viewed her victims as test subjects for perfecting her murder technique. The search also revealed Victoria's collection of false identity documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, and letters of reference that would allow her to establish new identities in future towns. She had been planning for the possibility of discovery and had multiple escape routes prepared. News of Victoria Slade's arrest spread through Thornfield and the surrounding communities with the speed of wildfire. The revelation that the refined, tragic widow, who had been a respected member of their society, was actually a serial killer shattered the community's sense of safety and trust. "How could we have been so blind?" Martha Whitman asked Dr. Hartwell when she came to provide a witness statement. "She seemed like such a lady, cultured, educated, genuinely caring. She made beautiful wedding dresses for half the brides in the county." She was expert at becoming what people needed her to be. Her success depended on being above suspicion, so she perfected the art of appearing perfectly normal while conducting systematic murder. The psychological impact on Theodore's daughter Clara was particularly severe. She had genuinely loved her stepmother and was devastated to learn that Evangeline had killed her father and would have killed her too if she had ever become a threat to the inheritance. "I feel so stupid," Teller told Dr. Hartwell. All the signs were there. The way she asked questions about father's business, the way she took over managing his finances, the way she isolated him from his old friends. But I thought she was just being a devoted wife. You weren't stupid. You were targeted by someone who had years of experience manipulating people's emotions and perceptions. She fooled everyone, including other doctors and law enforcement officers in multiple states. As news of Victoria Slade's arrest spread beyond Vermont, Dr. Hartwell began receiving correspondence from law enforcement agencies throughout New England and beyond. The scope of Victoria's criminal activities was far larger than anyone had initially realized. From the Boston Police Department, "We have at least 6 unsolved cases between 1916 and 1920 that match the pattern you've described. Recently married men dying of apparent natural causes, with wives who inherited substantial assets." From Connecticut State Police, 3 similar cases in Hartford and surrounding towns. The suspect used the name Isabella Cromwell and claimed to be a war widow from Massachusetts. From the Portland, Maine Sheriff's Office, 2 cases in 1920 involving a woman calling herself Margaret Whittemore. Lumbermill owner and shipping executive both died within 6 months of marriage.
But the most disturbing correspondence came from law enforcement agencies in states far from New England. Similar cases were being reported from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and even as far south as Virginia, suggesting that Victoria Slade might have been only one member of a larger network of female serial killers operating across the country. "The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental," Dr. Hartwell wrote in her journal. "Beautiful widows appearing in small towns, marrying successful men, and collecting insurance money after their husbands die of apparent natural causes. Either Victoria was far more mobile than we had." The night before Victoria was scheduled to be transferred to the state prison to await trial, Dr. Hartwell visited her in the county jail. She claimed to be conducting a medical evaluation, but she was actually hoping to gather information about the broader pattern of similar crimes. Victoria was sitting calmly in her cell, reading a book as if she were in a hotel rather than a jail. She looked up when Dr. Hartwell approached, showing no signs of distress or regret about her situation. "Dr. Hartwell, how thoughtful of you to visit. Are you here to gloat about your victory, or do you have questions about my methods?" "I'm here to understand something. The cases we're discovering in other states, were those all your work, or are there others like you?" Victoria smiled, the same cold expression that had become her trademark. "What do you think, Doctor? Do you believe that I am unique in recognizing the opportunities that society provides to women who are willing to exploit male psychology? You're not going to tell me. I'm not going to tell you anything that might help you prevent others from following in my footsteps. But I will give you one piece of advice. This investigation has made you famous among people you really don't want to know about your existence." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your methods for detecting systemic poisoning are now known to individuals who have reasons to avoid detection. You forced an evolution in technique that will make future cases much more difficult to solve." Dr. Hartwell felt a chill that had nothing to do with the February weather. "You're saying there are others?" "I'm saying that arresting me was like pulling one weed from a garden of poisonous plants. You may feel satisfied about saving Augustus Blackwood, but you've accomplished nothing meaningful in terms of protecting society from what we represent." Victoria returned to her book, dismissing Dr. Hartwell as if she were no longer worth attention. But as Dr. Hartwell turned to leave, Victoria spoke one final time. "Oh, and doctor, You might want to be more careful about your own safety in the coming months. Some people don't appreciate interference in their professional activities. As Dr. Hartwell left the county jail that night, she realized that solving the Victoria Slade case had opened a window into something far more terrifying than a single serial killer. The evidence suggested a network of women operating across the country, using marriage as a weapon and death as a business model. But Victoria's final warning raised an even chilling possibility that Dr. Hartwell's success in exposing the pattern had made her a target for killers who preferred to operate in the shadows.
While Victoria awaited execution, law enforcement agencies across the country began sharing information about similar cases. The pattern was staggering. At least 37 suspicious deaths of recently married men between 1915 and 1923, all involving beautiful widows who had moved from other locations. Dr. Hartwell coordinated much of this investigation, serving as a medical consultant to police departments in 12 states. She discovered that the Black Widow Network operated with sophisticated coordination, sharing information about detection methods, legal vulnerabilities, and profitable target locations. The killers maintained correspondence under false names, warning each other about law enforcement attention and sharing techniques for avoiding suspicion. Victoria's arrest had triggered a massive exodus, with several suspects disappearing from their current locations within weeks of her capture. They were learning from each other, Dr. Hartwell reported to a conference of law enforcement officials in Boston. Each arrest, each investigation, each successful prosecution taught the remaining killers how to operate more safely. 3 additional arrests were made based on evidence discovered in Victoria's possessions. Margaret Hull in Ohio, operating under the name Catherine Whitmore, had killed 4 husbands using digitalis. Sarah Blackwood in Pennsylvania had poisoned 5 men with oleander extract. Elizabeth Morrison in Virginia had used a combination of arsenic and mercury to murder 3 victims. Each arrest revealed the same pattern: meticulous planning, false identities, systematic poisoning, and careful management of legal and financial documentation. Victoria Slade was executed on October 13, 1923, 8 months after her arrest. She spent her final weeks in prison reading medical texts and writing letters to unknown recipients, correspondence that was intercepted but never decoded. Dr. Hartwell visited Victoria one final time the night before her execution, hoping to gather information that might help capture remaining network members. "You won," Dr. Hartwell told her. "Your arrest led to breaking up the entire network." Victoria smiled coldly. "Did it? You caught 4 women out of how many? Do you really believe that represents the full scope of our activities? How many others are there? Enough to continue the work. Women are finally learning to use their natural advantages systematically. You've merely forced an evolution in technique." Victoria's final statement before her execution was delivered with characteristic composure. "I die without regret for my actions, only for my detection. Society creates the conditions that make our work necessary. Until men stop being foolish enough to trust beautiful women with their assets, there will always be women intelligent enough to exploit that weakness." She was hanged at dawn, showing no fear or remorse, even as the noose was placed around her neck. The Victoria Slade case revolutionized criminal investigation and legal proceedings. Dr. Hartwell's methods for detecting systematic poisoning became standard procedure in suspicious death investigations. Insurance companies began requiring more extensive medical examinations before issuing large policies to recently married men. Augustus Blackwood made a full recovery and remarried in 1925 to a local woman whose family had lived in Vermont for 3 generations. He established the Hartwell Foundation for Medical Research, funding studies into detecting criminal poisoning.
Dr. Hartwell continued practicing medicine in Vermont until 1945, becoming one of the most respected forensic consultants in New England. She never married, dedicating her life to developing techniques for identifying and stopping serial killers. The broader investigation continued for years. By 1930, law enforcement had documented over 60 suspicious deaths that fit the Black Widow pattern, but only managed to secure convictions in 12 cases. The remaining suspects had vanished completely, presumably continuing their activities in locations where their methods weren't yet recognized. We learned that evil could wear the face of refinement and speak with the voice of culture. Victoria Slade and her associates proved that the most dangerous predators are often those who appear most civilized. The case established legal precedents for prosecuting systematic murder for financial gain and created investigative protocols that remain in use today. Victoria's execution marked the end of one killer, but the beginning of modern understanding about female serial murder. Most importantly, the investigation revealed that monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they host dinner parties, sew wedding dresses, and comfort grieving communities while systematically destroying lives for profit. Victoria Slade died claiming she was simply more honest about human nature than others dared to be. But her legacy raises disturbing questions about how many other predators operate among us, using charm and culture to mask calculated evil. The Black Widow network of the 1920s was finally broken, but at the cost of dozens of lives and the shattering of communities across America. Their story serves as a permanent reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it whispers sweetly and offers comfort while slowly poisoning everything it touches. What do you think? Could a network like Victoria's operate today? How many warning signs do we miss when killers are skilled at appearing normal? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more dark chapters from history that continue to influence how we understand crime and justice. Remember, the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who never look like monsters at all.